Arnab Chakrabarty is one of the best talents on the Sarod today. He's a relentless student of music, working on both technique and a sound that comes from deep within himself. Arnab is also known for his forthright, sometimes controversial views on music and the classical music establishment in India. We're going to have a frank chat with Arnab on music. We'll also get glimpses of his huge talent on the Sarod. Arnab Chakrabarty is on Our Talk with me, Jujhar Singh. Arnab, very nice to have you on Our Talk.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I believe you're the enfant terrible of the music world.
Some would like to think that.
You're frank and blunt with your views.
That I believe I am.
Well, we'll talk about that later. Let's talk about your music first. Your music is believed to have controlled virtuosity and exquisite tonal quality. What do these two characteristics mean for you?
I'll take the second one first. Tonal quality to me is the clarity of articulation, which means your musical ideas must be conveyed as they're conceived in one's mind. For me, this means clarity of pitch and a voice that carries through to the audience. And whether it's exquisite or whatever attributes people might want to ascribe, I think it's up to them, really. And controlled virtuosity, again, a fairly complex turn of phrase, but I think what's being conveyed here, I think, is that
you're not into showmanship.
Virtuosity, I think, is a misunderstood term. I think what's happened is that a lot of decibels and noise and rapid fire, picking is now perceived to be virtuosity, especially in the context of our music, instrumental music and stringed instruments. I personally believe that it's one's ability to convey musical ideas with clarity and precision is what virtuosity should be perceived as. And that's probably what reflects in that turn of phrase.
You also follow the Gaiki Ang on the Sarod, meaning you try and replicate the human voice on your instrument.
I believe that Indian classical music, particularly Hindustani music, is derived largely from singing, and I think there is a certain amount of unanimity in this opinion across the musical fraternity. And I do subscribe to this view. And as far as trying to make the instruments sing, I do believe that my influences are primarily Khayal vocal music, which I've also been fortunate to learn, both as a child and later on as an adult. And this feeds into my musical thought process.
So you're playing the Khayal Gaiki Ang on the Sarod as well?
As much as a plucked instrument will allow me to, yes.
Right. Well, it'd be lovely if you can play a little piece for us where we can see all these major characteristics of your Sarod. The controlled virtuosity, the tonal quality in Gaiki Ang.
Of course, I'd love to.
What are you going to play for us?
I will demonstrate a few phrases in a rag very dear to me, Rag Nand. It is a rather complex and at the same time emotionally very appealing rag, which is derived from rags Bihag and Mand.
Thank you very much, Arnab. That was very nice.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Now, you've talked in the past about how it's important for musicians not just to be technically strong, but also to think about music. What do you mean by that?
Well, thinking about music is the primary driving force when you're a raga musician. And what I mean by that is that every sentence that you speak has to be thought out. And when we
Every sentence on your instrument.
when we speak, when I say speak,
Yeah.
we are speaking music because we are communicating music to a listener or a set of listeners. And there has to be a storyline to this music.
When you said that every line of your music has to be thought of, is that a mental, intellectual exercise or an emotional exercise from the heart?
It's a combination of the two, I think. I think what happens is that when you've put a lot of thought in and churning into your perception of a rag, it automatically becomes an emotional expression as well. So when you're actually performing, you're not really thinking too hard. You've done your homework at home. You have worked on the various angles and spins that you'd like to give your raga articulation. And then when you play, when you perform, then I believe it must flow from within you.
You're from the Shah Jahanpur Gharana style of Sarod music. Who have been your gurus, your teachers? How has each of them developed your music?
I started my training from a musician of the Maihar Gharana, Pandit Brij Narayanji of Bombay. And he was the one who introduced me to the Sarod. And then I became a student of Pandit Buddhadev Das Gupta ji. And
You were with him for a decade.
A long association, yes. And I think he fundamentally shaped my technique and made me effectively into the Sarod player I am.
I believe you used to hero worship him.
Oh, to a great
Copy
extent.
every aspect of his personality.
Absolutely, and it was,
What did you do?
Lots of things. I would speak with him. I'd try to emulate his baritone, which I didn't have. The exact same pauses in his speech. I would even, use some rather archaic expressions because he'd studied in England, and he spoke English as it was spoken in the 1950s. And
how did it work for you with other people?
It was a social disaster. But I think what I was really trying to achieve, and I think it did work in terms of aiding my music, is that you try to imbibe a lot of the guru's personality, and that sort of feeds into what you're doing musically, because that's the quickest, really the quickest way of internalizing their musical thought process.
Well, the Bhagavad Gita says that leaders and people who are admired are copied by others.
Yes, and I think musicians of that order are also copied by others, and it's an intrinsic part of our training process.
Okay, so after him, who was your next guru?
I had a lot of interaction with and studied with a sitar player named Vinayak Chittarji of Goa. And I also had vocal training with Pandit Yashwant Bua Joshi. And then in 2006, I reverted to training with a Sarod player, Dr. Kalyan Mukherjee, who's also a shagird of Pandit Radhika Mohan
Very
Batra.
well known.
Exactly.
Yes, yeah.
And that was a kind of a rebirth for me musically in many ways. And that reignited my passion for the traditional style of the Sarod.
Most gurus, most music teachers expect their students to touch their feet. I've heard that the two of you used to shake hands with each other.
Yes, he was rather opposed to this, ritual demonstrations of servility and respect. And he genuinely felt that respect comes from the heart and doesn't really have to be shown in external manners.
Although the traditional view, is that touching feet is an act of humility, and therefore it lends to greater reception of knowledge.
Well, he came from the academic world, and I come from an academic family, and I think we were culturally very much in sync. And so that really helped accelerate my musical learning under his guidance, because he knew my expectations, I knew his, and I think socially we were very well matched.
Arnab, you're rooted in the Shah Jahanpur Gharana of Sarod music. In fact, some of your gurus like Professor Kalyan Mukherjee and Pandit Buddhadev Das Gupta were also from the same Gharana.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about the major characteristics of this style of playing. One is you don't pursue speed on the Sarod for the sake of it. What's the thinking over here?
Well, the thinking is to articulate your thoughts with absolute clarity and finesse. Now, speed for the sake of it has become quite the dominant narrative in this music. especially in very recent times, I would say the past decade. Now, our Sarod tradition has focused primarily on medium tempo or madhyalaya compositions. And this is for the primary purpose of articulating those salient features of the rag, which are absolutely essential and indispensable to the rag, in such a way that we demonstrate as much of its canvas as possible within the composition itself, very clearly and in an accessible way.
A second characteristic of your gharana is that you use tehais sparingly. You know, first, very quickly, what is a tehai?
A tehai is kind of a rhythmic melodic cadence, or an idea that is articulated 3 times successively in time, and each phrase of a tehai is of equal duration. And it's usually used to summarize what you have said. So in musical terms, a tehai is just a by the way.
One usually uses a tehai to conclude a musical passage or a piece itself.
Correct.
But people in your gharana use it sparingly, and when you use it aesthetically. Again, what's the thinking behind this?
And the thinking behind the sparse usage of tehais is that it is really a figure of speech, so to say, which is, which does not and should not dictate the musical outcomes so hugely.
A third characteristic of your Shah Jahanpur gharana or style of music are Feroz Khani guts or compositions.
Right.
What are they?
So a gut is essentially a melodic structure which is woven into a tal cycle. Now a tal cycle, I think I don't have to explain. It is a cyclical rhythmic pattern over which we play melodies. Now a Feroz Khani gut is a type of gut which aims to showcase areas of a rag, multiple areas of a rag, over about 2 to 3 cycles or more of a cycle, generally of teen tal, which is the most common time cycle, played
16 beats.
Exactly. Played in madhyalaya between, say, 130 to 180 BPM.
So medium speed.
Medium speed.
Yes.
And there are smart jumps from, say, the middle octave to the higher octave, or sometimes from the lower to the middle, or lower even to the 3rd octave, which encapsulate the entire spectrum of a rag in a sweep.
So I'll tell you what, why don't you play a short piece for us, a Feroz Khani gut, so we can see that, we'll see the smart jumps from one octave to another, and we'll see the other characteristics of your gharana, the controlled speed, and the sparing use of tehais.
Absolutely. I'll play a Feroz Khani gut in Rag Surdasi Malhar by Radhu Babu, Pandit Radhika Mohan Maitra.
Thank you very much, Arnab. Very beautiful.
Thank you.
Now, the sarod is one of the few instruments that's capable of expressing Hindustani ragas in great detail.
Exactly.
What details are we talking about here?
Well, first of all, the sarod is one of many, I would say about 5 or 6 instruments. The sitar, the sur shringar, sur bahar, and of course the rudravina, which can express a rag well. And well, one of the first requirements of rag music, of course, is meend, which is the ability to slide from note to note in a continuous and articulate manner.
That's very important in Hindustani classical music.
Absolutely, it's the essence of it. So this is a simple meend, slide from note A to note B. In this case, re to ga. Now, a compound meend could be, you know, ABC, CBA, ACB, ACBD, anything. But here we take a relatively simple one.
Thanks very much. Interesting. Arnab, let me ask you, you were born to parents or people of science. How did you get into music?
Well, they're also people of music in the sense that they are really devoted music lovers. And my mother trained in Hindustani vocal music for many, many years before I was born.
So you heard music all around you growing up?
I did, and one of my earliest influences were the 78 RPM recordings of Pandit D.V. Paluskar. And I was caught trying to copy them vocally. And that's how my parents felt that I must learn music.
Arnab, a major proportion of our leading musicians are gharanedar musicians. You know, they come from a gharana or a family of musicians. How much has that been a handicap for you?
When you look at the number of performing classical musicians today, most musicians of any caliber are not from gharanas. They have learned from musicians who have learned from gharanedar musicians, but essentially the musical knowledge that existed in the 1920s and 30s has been so vastly documented by Pandit Bhatkhande that this information is today in the public domain. What a guru can teach is the stylistics of delivery and, of course, technical things. But the musical information, which was really scarce and hard to access back in the day, is really very easily accessible to anyone today.
So you're saying that now it doesn't really make much of a difference being a gharanedar or a non-gharanedar musician?
Frankly, it doesn't. Yeah. What makes a difference is having the musical ambience all around you, listening to music very early on, and I think that's where the gharanedar musicians do have an advantage, is that they do, you know, from birth they've been exposed to music, and I do believe that musical inclinations and temperaments are a function of nurture rather than nature.
Yeah, they're formed early.
Yeah, exactly, and it's, you know, it could be while you are still a fetus, it could very well be while you are a very young person, when you're a toddler. So it's those influences that are very important, what we call sanskars. I think that's what really makes a musician.
Yes. Arnab, you've been stirring the pot a lot in the music world.
Have I?
You've written in a blog, for example, that a lot of our leading musicians are actually of mediocre talent.
Oh, that's totally not true. What I mean
you suggested that.
Well, it might come off as a suggestion of that sort, but that's not my intention. My intention was to say that when people have a lot of fame and success, they might get a little complacent. And complacence is essentially when you start focusing on those things that get you easy applause. So going deep into a rag and being very true to the musical content that you have learned sometimes might not generate applause and, you know, the limelight that a musician seeks, the performer's high, so to speak. And perhaps that's the reason why a lot of our leading musicians have indeed taken to playing to the gallery, which is unfortunate. And by playing to the gallery, I mean, you know, choosing speed over material, choosing speed over articulation, choosing high decibel levels, very loud amplification. And these are issues that ail this music today, and I do believe that they require addressing.
You've written that a lot of our music festivals around the country are too focused on the big names. And that in turn, the big names come out with rehearsed, loud and speedy music, dumbing down music for commercial success. This is why you're the enfant terrible of the music world.
Again, as I said, it's not it's not a label that I have sought out. It's, you know, if you speak the truth, there will be some people, or if you speak to your convictions, I think there will always be people who disagree with you. And
how many feathers have you ruffled?
I have no idea. I haven't counted them. It's like counting sheep, you know.
Arnab, let's take a little break over here. We'll come back. We'll look at where you plan to go from here in your musical journey. Sarod talent, Arnab Chakrabarty is with us. We'll be right back on our talk. Welcome back. You're watching Our Talk with me, Jujhar Singh. Rising Sarod talent, Arnab Chakrabarty is with us. Arnab, what are you hoping to achieve with your music?
I just hope to play what I have learned and processed sincerely, and to try and demystify Hindustani music to as wide a segment of the audience as possible, and just enjoy the process.
All the very best. Thank you very much for joining us on Our Talk.
Thank you so very much for having me.
And it would be wonderful if you can leave our viewers with one of your own compositions.
Sure, I'll play a Gath, co-composed by my guru, Dr. Mukherjee, and I, in Rag Chhaya Bihag, which is a jod or hybrid rag, which combines Rag Bihag with Rag Chhaya.